Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to check out this week's live stream. So, of course, before I do get started, as always, I do want to mention my website, which is bponlinefitness.com. And I do want to really encourage you guys to check it out. If you want to learn a little bit more about online coaching, as well as check out a ton of free resources as it relates to online coaching, you can find it all there. I do have a fitness blog that I to upload to every Friday. And then I also send out an email newsletter every Monday if you're signed up to my email list, which you can sign up to on the home page when you go directly to the bottom. So definitely check that out. If you want to learn a little bit more about what I have to offer, check that out as well. So let's go ahead and get started, guys, with talking about today's topic, which is on muscle fiber types and training adaptations. So I know that this topic seems like it's a pretty detailed topic and a pretty deep topic when it comes to really discussing weightlifting and muscle gain overall. But I am going to break down this topic and really dive deep into understanding the differences between different muscle fibers and how they adapt to workouts. So here's the table of contents on what we're going to be discussing today. So of course we're going to go over the science of muscle fibers, the Heinemann size principle, fiber-specific training approaches, how fibers adapt over time, eccentric training, and periodization for muscle fiber adaptations. Again, guys, I know that there's a lot of crazy terms here or large terms, but I am going to go over them and explain what they mean and really give you guys a clear idea on what we're talking about because a lot of topics when it comes to the concept of weightlifting is really simple at their baseline. On the surface, a lot of topics look really detailed and look really not approachable, but when we really dive deep into these topics, it's easy to understand what we're talking about as we, really dissect the topic itself. So, why understanding fiber types matters. So, your muscles, of course, are made up of different fibers, each with its unique properties that are affecting performance and growth potential in your workouts. Knowing the roles of type 1 as well as type 2 fibers helps tailor training for endurance, strength, or hypertrophy. So there's two main types, and that's going to be the top one, which is slow twitch, and top two, which is fast twitch muscle fibers. So just keep that in mind that that's going to come up pretty often here as we're discussing this particular topic. Smart training adapts to these fibers, maximizing recruitment, efficiency, and long-term progress. So let's go ahead and start with the science of muscle fibers themselves. So top one, of course, is the slow twitch muscle fibers. These muscle fibers are really engaged through high endurance, oxidative, and are often in fatigue resistance, but have a low growth potential. There's a type 2A, which is a fast twitch oxidative muscle fiber. This is more adaptive to moderate power. It is fatigue resistance and it's adaptable to different training methods. Type 2X, which is fast twitch glycolytic, glycolytic, maximum power, rapid fatigue, highest growth potential. So each of these fibers are really they're going to adapt to specific things. One thing to keep in mind, especially, as we age, one thing I do want to mention as we're getting into talking about this specific topic is that there are specific muscle fibers that as we age, they don't, stay with us, I guess you could say. And what I mean by that is that, of course, as we age, it's very important that we weight train, especially after the age of 30 is, the really important time to really start weightlifting and training so that we keep our muscle fibers healthy. And when we don't train those muscle fibers, earlier as soon as possible, we do lose those muscle fibers. So there are specific muscle fibers, of course, that we keep. And this is going to be mostly the top one muscle fibers, but top two are the ones that really lead to like really, when you see somebody who's gotten big or who has grown in muscle, usually that's an effect of the top two muscle fibers. So that's something that I wanted to address first and foremost. But just know that there's different fibers, and certain fibers are going to be stimulated more with specific training, and that's going to be more in the line with top two because they can adapt to those changes. So, like what you see here, like with the moderate power, the top 2A, they're fatigue resistant and adaptable. And what that means with being adaptable is that those muscle fibers can adapt to new, forms of training, and which is leading to muscle growth. So why does it matter specifically to know these muscle fibers? So again, I don't want to just give you information as just a filler, like this is what this is, like just kind of just specifically just trying to teach you something. I want to explain why it's important into the context of when it comes to weightlifting and when it comes to accomplishing our goal. So again, each fiber type responds differently to training, endurance, strength, or hypertrophy, like I just mentioned, depending on what's being engaged. So targeted training adapts these fibers for improved performance and growth. So again, understanding fiber types helps to optimize load, reps, rest, and recovery for maximal results in your workouts. So again, this isn't just filler. This is something that you can really think about as you're approaching how you do your weightlifting and weight training, strength training overall. So the Hahnemann size principle describes how motor units are recruited in order of increasing size during muscle contraction. So motor units is a motor neuron in the muscle fibers it innervates. So small motor units, sorry, I keep tongue tying between those. So small motor units are activated first to contain slow twitch top 1 fibers for low force endurance tasks. Larger motor units are recruited as force demands increase, containing fast twitch top 2 fibers for high force and explosive tasks. So, what I want to get across here before we go any further as we're talking about this is that depending on the type of force you are placing on the body, again, going into simple terms when we're talking about this. So, when we're talking about force on the body, we're talking about the exercises we do, the workouts we do, whether it be, it could be weightlifting, it could be cardio, it could be any type of exercise. How we approach those exercises and how we, our intensity in those exercises is going to determine what muscle fibers are going to be activated more, if that makes sense. So when we're talking about top one, again, these are mostly activated at low force and endurance tasks. So these aren't activated as much in the more high intensity, the more explosive movements. These aren't activated as much in those types of movement patterns or exercises. Whereas with the top two, those fibers are activated with very explosive movements. And, you think of what you could sort of align with top two when you're thinking of high force and explosive tasks. This could be into the, in the same vein as talking about, it could be like performance training, it could be hit training, anything of that sort, which is very high intensity, anything like interval training, you're going to get more of those muscle fibers recruited. Whereas with a low force task, again, like I would think cardio and things of that nature are going to be more so, activated when we're talking about those top one fibers. Again, keep in mind that these, I'm just giving you a example. That's not to say that when you're doing normal weightlifting that specific fibers are not being engaged. Those fibers are being engaged, but to the degree kind of depends on the intensity of the exercise. So again, low intensity tasks. Again, what we're going over here is really the difference between the intensity of the workouts that we do. And again, keep this in to the same context as when we're talking about muscle fibers. So separating from the muscle fiber side of things, low intensity tasks are known as light cardio, walking. This is primarily engaging small motor units, which is top one muscle fibers. High intensity or maximal effort exercises, again, heavy lifting, sprints, recruit larger motor units. Again, this is more of top two muscle fibers. So I hope that you're kind of getting, kind of understanding where this is playing here, what's being engaged, and what muscle fibers are being activated depending on the movement and exercise. Progressive overload, this is something that I talk about a lot of times because, especially with my clients who focus on muscle gain, this is something I talk about over and over again because it's really important. So, what progressive overload is doing, and it kind of relates to this concept of muscle fibers because you're putting stress on those muscle fibers, they're tearing and then they're growing back. And that's sort of how the progressive overload process works as we're gradually increasing weight. So, progressive overload is increasing resistance, and increasing resistance are essential to activate all motor units. So, we're activating not only one type of fiber, we're activating all motor units, all muscle tops in those exercises with progressive overload. Multiple muscles are being engaged, multiple muscle fibers are being activated at the same time. So I hope this is being clear to everyone here that, again, depending on what you're doing, specific tops muscle fibers are going to be engaged. So fiber specific training approaches. So again, we're kind of going back to this just to really bring more clarity on what these types of muscle fibers are doing and when they're activating. So again, like when we're talking about muscle gain, your priority is really activating both in a really balanced approach. And again, that goes into the concept of progressive overload, the gradual, we're basically gradually increasing the volume, of the weight we're lifting. And like I've mentioned before, progressive overload is not necessarily just weight, it also can be intensity. There's different ways that it can be done. But as we're increasing intensity, of course, those muscle fibers are going to be, activating differently. I mean, it's going to be the same either way, but, in how those muscles grow. But keep in mind that you can do different methods for progressive overload. It doesn't necessarily have to be, increasing weights. So, fiber specific training approaches. So, top one, again, slow twitch muscle fibers. Think of these as low intensity or high volume endurance work. So, this could be long distance running, this could be high rep body weight exercises, longer time under tension for oxidative stress and fatigue resistance. So, these types of muscle fibers are not going to be fatigued as often. And again, like if you're doing like if you're doing a long distance run, of course you may feel some, some sort of soreness from that, but you're not going to as often with this because you're only primarily activating those slow twitch muscle fibers. Top two, again, is fast twitch fibers. Again, these are activated through high intensity, low rep strength training. So heavy squats, powerlifting, again, explosive plyometric exercises. Think of plyometric again as really fast paced, sort of exercises. This is not like we're not thinking about, specifically weightlifting, we're thinking about, sort of going through circuits and intervals. That's sort of what you need to think about when it comes to plyometric. Like when you're doing like maybe like a long distance jump or anything like that, is kind of going to be labeled under plyometric. So just think of that as an explosive movement. When I talk about explosive, of course, that's just like really rapid movement patterns. So this is power-based exercises against again sprints and Olympic lifts. Now Olympic lifts, just to clarify, because I know that there's a lot of terms here and specific things I've not went over. So Olympic lifts and powerlifting are sort of in the same sort of vein, where these types of lifts are not the same as, more traditional weightlifting. So in traditional weightlifting, a lot of times, I always mention, slow and controlled movements. And that's kind of what traditional strength training and weightlifting is, really having maximum amount of control in your weights. Whereas when we're talking about powerlifting and Olympic lifting, these are like really explosive. This is like what you see again, like what you see in competitions where they're like lifting like really massive weight and they're, raising it up. Like if you think of like the clean or snatch exercises, those really quick movements where they're having the bar, they're raising the bar up and they're having it on their back. That's those Olympic lifts, powerlifting type exercises. That's not something that somebody who's just focusing, specifically on muscle gain. Those are more about, they're all about, strength, building more strength. That's the big thing with those. And they're not for the traditional, person who's wanting to, especially somebody's wanting to gain muscle through hypertrophy. You're not going to do that type of exercise. However, there is going to be, certain types of exercises that are going to activate those top two fibers. So the emphasis on eccentric overload in near failure sets, that's another thing too, where these muscle fibers are activated. A lot of times here recently, especially in the fitness sphere, a lot of people talk about training to failure. And I think that's a great training method. The thing is, though, I think it's important to be cautious about how far you go as far as the reps that you perform. And really, being intentional and having a balanced approach with your training, I think is most important. But that's something I want to mention there is that it's not a bad thing to do training to failure because you've likely, if you've heard a lot about, weightlifting and things like that here recently, a lot of people talk about training to failure. And it does help in a lot of cases, but it's important to be cautious when you're doing those exercises due to, the potential for injury. So that's something that I do want to address there. So programming considerations. Again, you want to balance both low and intensity work to fully engage all fiber tops. Having an approach where you're having cardio with a, mix of weightlifting is where you're going to engage those muscle fibers all effectively. Periodized training to target different fiber systems. This could be strength, hypertrophy, and endurance. Include recovery protocols to support fiber repair and adaptation. So again, recovery protocols meaning what we do post workout, how we fuel our body, our nutrition, that's going to make a big difference as well. So how fibers adapt over time. Adaptations happen in phases. This can be neural, structural, or metabolic. So training type and intensity determine which fibers adapt most. Continued challenge is essential to avoid plateaus. Again, this is kind of going back to the concept of progressive overload in a sense. So, what we're talking about here is from the beginning of your weight training to, basically long term. So, when somebody is first getting started with weightlifting or weight training, there is a phase which would be neural adaptation. So this is weeks 1 through 4 of your training. So this is leading to improved motor unit recruitment, better coordination, and initial strength gains. So if you've heard a lot of times, people really notice there's certain people that'll notice, significant changes in the first, sort of few weeks. That's kind of where that comes in. So this could be strength primarily. So just keep that in mind that this is sort of where you're getting that initial, those fibers are being initially activated. It's that neural adaptation of those muscle fibers. Hypertrophy and structural changes. So this happens within 4 to 12 weeks. Again, the first month or two as you're getting into your exercises. Top two fibers increase in size. That's where you're seeing that muscle growth that happens. You're getting a greater cross-sectional area and enhanced force production. So you're able to really lift a little bit more with force than you could before. And you're able to really, see more of that definition in your overall, physique. Metabolic adaptation. So weeks 4 through 16, top one fibers improve through endurance. This is increasing mitochondrial density and improved oxygen utilization. So as you're going through these workouts, you are actually, again, this isn't just about building our physique. You're having a lot of things under the hood that are actually really being, engaged and that are really helping you overall with your health. You've got, really helping to improve the different functions of your body. So that's what we're talking about here with the metabolic adaptation. Long-term adaptation is months 3 through 6 plus. So this is long-term. So this can lead to a risk of plateau if no new stimuli. So what that means is that this is something that happens if you've been weightlifting for an extended period of time and you don't make any kind of changes or periodization, meaning you don't phase out your workouts, you don't change what you do, you stay just consistently doing the same thing. That's okay. It's good that you have the habit of being consistent, but you do kind of have to change here and there a few things. You've got to add new stimuli, meaning new volume, new types of exercises to those muscles in order for them to adapt to, new force that's being put on them, if that makes sense. So that's where, like, if you've been training for a while and you feel like you're not growing, well, those muscles have already went through so much different stimuli. They're used to the stimuli that you've already given them. So you've got to give them something else. You've got to, perform different methods. And that's not saying that you have to completely change your exercise all the time, but what you need to do is go through phases where you periodize your workouts in that, okay, you're doing this set of workouts for this, however many weeks. Okay, then we're going to shift our focus. Maybe we're going to move into cable based exercises, and then we'll shift back into dumbbell. You can't keep your exercises staying the same all the time. Your muscles adapt to specific things. And that's where the concept of progressive overload, as well as, changing, going through phases in your exercises makes a difference. So you're going to get combined strength and endurance benefits, of course, at this stage, and refinement and recruitment patterns. Again, there is a risk of plateau when you get to this point, but it's all about how you, go through different phases. You constantly are giving your body new challenges. And of course, still at times, we do need to slow down and we do need to give our body, sort of a deload phase where we're sort of slowing down with our intensity. But what you need to keep in mind is that you need to, keep bringing new stimuli. If you want to continue to see more growth, you have to give more stimuli to those muscles because they've already adapted to what you've given them if you've stayed consistent with your routine. So you've got to, bring something new that's going to engage them a little bit more. Again, this is not just trying to switch up exercises all the time. This could be through progressive overload. It's gradual intensity, challenging yourself in that gradual intensity. There's different things that you can do. It's not just about constantly switching up exercises. You do need to stay consistent with the exercises you do for a certain period of time, but you do have to give your body something new to challenge it to lead to more muscle growth. So eccentric training, and this method here is actually a great idea to keep in mind, especially, as you're getting to the later stages of, weightlifting and sort of your muscles are adapting more. So eccentric training is basically training that focuses on the lengthening phase of the muscle contraction. So this is the lowering phase and or basically the resisting the load phase. So again, this is where you're lowering that weight down like if you're doing a curl. This is that would be eccentric training is having intentional focus on the lowering phase. So key benefits, again, this increases strength and muscle size, improves muscle control and injury resilience. It boosts tendon stiffness for joint stability. So you're actually really helping with tendons as well and your joints overall when you're doing this type of exercise. So basically with slow eccentrics, this means that you're spending roughly 3 to 6 seconds lowering the weight. Again, you could try overload with negatives, which is eccentric pull-ups. So this is where you're doing a pull-up, but you're basically holding that lowering position for an extended period of time. Controlled tempo helps to emphasize time under tension, which is something I've discussed before. And another thing too is why it matters. So it's greater for mechanical tension during the eccentric phase. This is what helps to promote muscle hypertrophy. So it can handle 30 to 40% more load than the concentric phase. So keep that in mind as well. So it also enhances muscle fiber recruitment and micro damage, stimulating growth. So I think this is a good method to keep in mind when we're focusing on wanting to add some new stimuli into our, training regimen because when you're adding a slow eccentric, it completely changes up your workouts. You may not think it does, but when you focus on intentionally slowing down your reps, it makes a big difference in what's being engaged. You notice how much more that muscle is being engaged. One exercise I always mention is the isometric bicep curl or isometric hold bicep curl basically. And this is where you're doing a traditional bicep curl in one arm, but in the other arm, you're holding the contraction. This is a little bit different than what we're talking about eccentric, but it's kind of in that same vein where we're adding a little bit more challenge to our normal workouts. That's the same concept here with eccentric training in that we're slowly lowering, like with a bicep curl, we may, spend a couple seconds doing that lowering phase, but when you intentionally think about slowly lowering the weight down in a bicep curl, you see a whole new, type of training method versus just doing the normal bicep curl in the same, sort of time under tension. There's more muscle being activated as you're lowering that weight slowly rather than just rapidly going through. And that's something that I mention all the time is that so many people, and I know that not a lot of people are aware of, specific things to do in workouts, and that's totally fine. But one thing I notice a lot of times with people, and this is why certain people I don't think see muscle growth, is because they do the reps so fast. It helps a lot to activate the muscle more when you're slowing down those reps. It makes a massive difference. That's something I just want to emphasize. I know I've said it before, but it does make a difference when you slow down your reps and being intentional with how you're lifting the weight. So, periodization for muscle fiber adaptations. So, again, like I mentioned, it helps to have training phases. And that's what periodization means is that you're going through different types of phases in training with your workouts. So, this could be endurance, which is anatomical adaptation phase. This is higher reps, lower loads. So, this is going to be targeting type 1 fibers. Hypertrophy phase would be moderate reps and as well as load, and this is targeting both muscle fiber types. Strength and power phase is lower reps, higher load, which targets primarily top 2 muscle fibers. So you're seeing, sort of a difference in what's being engaged here. Structured progression of training intensity, volume, and focus over time balances hypertrophy, strength, and power development. Again, go through phases through your workouts. Spend, a few weeks in a set number of workouts, whether no matter how you're doing, if you're doing a push pull legs, if you're doing, a split back biceps, chest triceps, no matter what your specific method is, make sure that you spend enough time on those workouts and then change it up in the next, couple weeks. So why it matters. So this is again reduces that risk of plateau and overtraining. It also ensures balanced development of both fiber types. Again, when we're focusing on, really doing different training methods, but also, having that balanced approach, it's going to help with having more muscle fibers activate. This also supports long-term gains in strength, size, and performance because we're giving the body, of course, new stimuli, as I mentioned before. Alrighty, guys. So I know that that was a lot of stuff, and I really hope that I sort of dissected that a little bit better for you to understand. Again, when we're talking about muscle fiber types, just know that the specific fiber types that are activated are based primarily on the intensity of the exercise. If you're thinking of cardio based exercise, it's likely going to be top one muscle fibers that are going to be activated more. Whereas if you're thinking of top two, you're thinking of explosive, really fast paced movements. Those are where those muscle fiber types are going to be activated more. Thinking of muscle gain and hypertrophy, both fiber types are activated in a balanced approach. So when you're wanting to focus on muscle gain, you want to have a balanced approach with both of those fiber types. So again, guys, I hope that this gives you a little bit more insight on this topic. And I tried as much as possible to really clear up any of the, really detailed stuff and really dissect that. But of course, if you guys do have questions about anything I discussed in this, feel free to let me know. I'm willing to answer those questions that you may have. But I really, again, I enjoy talking about these things, and I hope that you guys find this insightful and not boring. I want to make it, understandable and something to think about, as you're going about your workouts, something that you can take with you. So thank you guys once again. You can check out my website, bponlinefitness.com, where you can check out a ton of information as it relates to online coaching, as well as a ton of free resources related to fitness and nutrition. Definitely check that out. And guys, I will have another live stream next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. That event will be uploaded and posted by the end of the week, so watch out for that. But once again, thank you guys for taking the time to check this out. I hope that you found it helpful and valuable. And I will once again see you guys next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time in the next live stream. So thank you guys.